Hey, Banksy class, another story. So, this one's called, The Ugly Toad. And I did ask you last time, I wonder if anyone knows the difference between a toad and a frog. And these stories have been really informative so far, so maybe it might even help us to understand if we don't know already. Once upon a time, a big old toad wanted to cross the road to get to a pond he knew on the other side. He couldn't jump high and quickly like his cousins, the frog, could. Ooh, already there's a comparison. He could only do small hops or crawl, but he set off valiantly, hoping to get across the road before anything came along. He was almost across when a horse and cart came down the lane. Clippity-clop, clippity-clop, clippity-clop went the horses' hooves, and the old toad heard them. He tried to hop away quickly, but one of the horse's hooves trod on his back leg. Almost at once the horse lifted up his hoof again and went on, not knowing that he had crushed the foot of the toad. "Oh," groaned the toad to himself, crawling to the side of the road, dragging his hurt foot behind him. "What a bit of bad luck! I can hardly walk now. Oh, how my foot is hurting me." He was in so much pain that he could not go any further. He was in so much pain I've just read that bit. He was in so much pain that he could not go any further. He squatted by the side of the road, hoping that his foot would soon get better, but it didn't. He tried again to crawl, but his foot hurt him too much, so he lay there, half hidden by a tuft of grass, hoping that no enemy would come by. The big rat ran by and stopped when he saw the toad. "Aha! Dinner for me," thought the rat, knowing that the toad was hurt. He ran up to the toad and snapped at him. The toad still could not crawl away, but he had a good trick to play on the rat. He oozed out an evil-smelling, horrible-tasting liquid all over his back. When the rat tried to bite him, he got his mouth full of this nasty stuff. "Blech, horrible," said the rat, and stood staring at the toad with his mouth open, trying to let the nasty-tasting stuff drip out of his mouth. "Horrible! I wouldn't have you for my dinner or anything." He ran off, and the toad still sat there, glad to be rid of him, the rat. Then he heard the footsteps coming down the lane, and he shrank back into the grass, trying to look like a brown clod of earth. He really did look like one. Soon a boy came up, whistling. He almost trod on the toad, but he did not see him and went whistling on. He thought the old toad was just a lump of earth. He stayed still, hoping that his foot would stop hurting, but the horse's hoof had been hard and heavy. It was a wonder it had not cut the toad's foot right off. Then the toad heard more footsteps, lighter ones this time. He crouched down again, but this time the passer-by was sharper-eyed than the boy had been. "Ooh, a toad," said the voice. And the toad, looking up cautiously, saw a little girl gazing down at him. She wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Ugh, nasty creature. Can't bear toads. Ugly things with your pimply backs and your creepy crawly ways. Don't like you one little bit." The toad crouched very still. He was afraid. This little girl might stamp on him. Children were sometimes very cruel to creatures like him. But he couldn't help being an ugly toad. He was born like that. However, the little girl did not stamp on him. She wasn't cruel. She did think the toad was ugly, and she didn't like him much, but she wasn't going to be unkind. "I don't like ugly creatures," she said to the toad. "I couldn't bear to touch you. Ooh, that would be horrid. It would make me feel ill." This made the toad feel sad. He wished he'd been born a butterfly or a bird. Then perhaps the little girl would have liked him, but you had to be what you were born to be. There wasn't any help for that. Then suddenly the little girl saw the toad's foot. It was all crushed and flattened. She stared at it in horror. "Toad, your foot is all squished and squashed to bits. Is it hurting you? Oh, how did it happen? Did someone tread on you, Toad?" The toad still crouched flat. He knew the little girl wouldn't tread on him now, but he was still afraid. She looked at him, sad, because of his foot. "Oh, I can't leave you here like this now," she said. "I'm sorry I said all those unkind things now. I didn't know you were hurt. I think I had better take you home to my mother. She will know exactly what to do with your foot." The toad didn't want to be taken home, He wanted to be left alone in peace. The little girl was wondering how to carry him. "Although I'm very sorry for you, I simply can't touch you," she said. "I can't. I should drop you if I touched you, you see. I don't like toads, don't like how you feel." Then she thought of using her handkerchief. Handkerchief, because your generation probably won't even know what a handkerchief is. Handkerchiefs are very small pieces of cloth that people would keep in their pockets and use to wipe their nose. These days we just need tissues because what's the slogan when you kill? Because obviously since COVID, the germs, if you've got a runny nose, you blow your nose, you bin it, you wash your hands. That's the most hygienic way to do it. Handkerchiefs weren't deemed very hygienic in the end, but you know, Enid Blyton is an author from back in the day. So handkerchiefs, there you go, Mrs. Fisher's definition of a handkerchief. So this little girl's got a small piece of cloth, so she's thinking that she could pick the toad up with this, and then she hasn't actually got to feel his sliminess or his bumps. She would wrap the toad in that and carry him by taking hold of the four corners of the hanky. Then she would not need to touch him at all. So, to the toad's surprise and fright, she dropped her hanky over him. She rolled him gently into it and picked him up in the hanky. She carried him by taking hold of the four corners, but she didn't even like doing that. She took him home. The toad did not wriggle or struggle because it hurt his foot too much. He just lay in the hanky, very miserable, wondering what was going to happen to him. The little girl went in at her gate. She called to her mother, "Mummy, I've got a hurt toad. Can you do something for him?" Her mother was very surprised. She undid the hanky and took the toad into her bare hands. She didn't mind touching the creature at all. She saw the hurt foot and she felt sorry for him. "I can't do much," she said. "We'll just bathe his foot with a very weak iodine, but it's no good binding it up. The best thing you can do for him, Jenny, is to put him in a cool, shady corner of the garden, somewhere where there are plenty of flies for him to catch, and leave him to himself. Maybe the foot will heal itself." "I don't like him much," said Jenny. "He can't help being a toad," said her mother. "You might have been born a toad. You think how sad you would be if people hated you and tried to hurt you because you happened to be a bit ugly. That's not fair, is it, Jenny?" "No, it isn't," said Jenny. She looked down at the toad and he looked up at her. She saw his eyes. "Mummy, he's got the most beautiful eyes," she said, surprised. "Do look at them. They are like jewels in his head, gleaming as bright as copper." "All toads have lovely eyes," said Mother. "They are nice creatures, Jenny, and make good pets." "Oh no, Mummy," said Jenny, astonished. "I have never heard of a toad as a pet before." "There are quite a lot of things you haven't heard of," said Jenny's mother. "Now I've finished bathing his foot. Do you think you could possibly bring yourself to carry him into your hands to a nice bit of the garden, or do you dislike this toad so much?" Jenny then felt a bit ashamed of herself. She looked down at the toad. His coppery eyes gleamed kindly at her. She looked patient and wise. "I'll carry him," she said, and she picked him up gently in her hands. He kept quite still. Jenny took him down to the bottom of the garden and put him in the cool hedge behind her father's lettuces. "There you are," she said. "Stay there and catch flies. I don't know what else you'll eat, but there are heaps of flies here for you." And there were. The toad heard a big one buzzing just over his head. He looked at it, and then, quick as a flash, he shot out a long, sticky tongue, caught the fly on the tip of it, swallowed, and looked at Jenny. "A good meal," he seemed to say. Jenny laughed. "You're rather nice," she said, and left him. She forgot all about him, and a week went by, then 2 weeks. Then Daddy came home one evening, bringing 2 delicious lettuces for supper. "Good gracious," said Jenny's mother, pleased. "I thought you told me that all your lettuces had been eaten by slugs. What beauties these are!" "Ah, I've got someone to guard my lettuces for me," said Father. "And a very good fellow he is too. He never allows a single slug in my lettuce bed now." "Who is he?" said Jenny, puzzled. "He's a toad," said her father. "A wise, friendly, kind old toad. He lives in the hedge behind my kitchen garden, and he keeps guard over the lettuces. See how well they've grown since the old toad looked after them for me." "Daddy, you must mean my toad. I forgot all about him," said Jenny, excited. "Your toad? I thought you didn't like toads," said her father. "What do you mean?" And then Jenny told him. And we shall know if it is my toad by his foot, she said. He's got a mended foot, Daddy. I didn't notice, said Father. Let's go and see. So they both went to see, and there was the old toad, and behind him was his hurt foot, mended and healed now, but rather a funny shape. It is my toad, said Jenny. Look, it's crawling over to me, Daddy. He knows I'm the little girl who brought him home. Tickle his back with grass, said Father. He'll like that. So Jenny did, and the toad liked it very much. He tried to scratch his back with one of his feet, and that made Jenny laugh. Oh, you're a good old toad, she said. I like you, and you shall be my pet. He is her pet, and he still keeps guard over the kitchen garden today. I know, because I've been there and I've seen him. And so that's the end of that story. So, appearances can't go just by appearances. Our poor old toad. Some people might think they are very ugly creatures, but actually they're very beautiful. They're part of nature. And in the end, Jenny saw his beauty too. So that takes us to our next story, which is Sly the Squirrel Gets a Shock. Okay, but again, what an informative story. We know how a toad defends itself against rats, don't we? And we also know how we might be able to feed a toad, what they might feed on. And by that as well, we also know what a habitat might look like for a toad, where they need to be able to find this food and this water to survive. And this is all really good story learning for our science learning when we go back in September. So even though they are just stories and we're just listening and we're having fun, this gives us a whole well of information, which I'm really looking forward to talking to all of you in September about. So join me next time for Sly the Squirrel Gets a Shock.